Hi everyone, my name is Rafael Luzan. I am the founder and CEO of A-Teams, a company we founded not a long time ago to empower the most highly skilled independent professionals in tech who care about working with like-minded people to do work that is very meaningful and purposeful on their own terms. We are kicking off today a content series that we call The Modern Independent, where we are highlighting some of the most interesting war stories, lessons learned, and ideas from independent professionals. We're kicking this off today with Didi Medina, a phenomenal product designer from our community who's worked for many years for some of the best companies in the world, some that I really like Compass, Envision, Digit, but one day realized I want to go at it on my own. I'm excited to learn more about Didi's stories and his insights and ideas. And it's my pleasure today to welcome him to the Modern Independent. Hi, Didi. How are you?
Happy to be here.
Look, I remember thinking when I first met you, like this guy got this whole independent thing down to art and science. And that was pretty outstanding to me. And that's why we're very intrigued and excited to also welcome you to share some of your learnings with the community, I believe, in a few days. So can you, to begin with this, I'd love to understand, so what's your craft? Like, what's your skill?
My skill, my background is in product design. I design software. That's primarily where I kind of grew and developed myself. At this stage in my career, what I do is I kind of bring a lot of the experience that I've had building like applications from the design side in different companies to newer companies that have less of a formal methodology on how to do that. They have really good vision, they have really good ideas. So I usually come into earlier stage companies and help them build out their design processes or design culture, as well as the design of the app. So it's kind of a design department at large.
Okay. So product design, like, did you study this formally? Like, how did you fall into this?
No, I didn't study anything formally. I went to the Bay Area when I was about 17 years old. That was like for my first job in Palo Alto. And the way I got into design was, well, I moved out of my parents' house when I was 14 and a half. And I needed a way to pay rent. So I asked myself, like, what is a job I can do that doesn't need a diploma? And I landed on photography. Because
when you were 15 years old?
Yeah, that was the only thing I can come up with. It was, I just like, I looked around and I was like, all right, what are professions that don't require a diploma that I can probably just like, slide through the radar without a diploma with and get like real money for it. And photography seemed like the way to go. And then once I started getting into photography, I started playing with like design tools, and that like plus a year or two ended up with like falling into like the laps of UI design, UX design, stuff like that.
Well, wait a second. So you're 15 years old.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay, so you're a 15-year-old kid in Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah.
And you decide for some reason to just get out, go on your own and move to Palo Alto and get a job as a photographer.
No. I moved out of my parents' house when I was about 15 in New York, and then worked as a photographer early on, and that kind of led into getting into graphic design, which led into getting into UI design. And then eventually when I was like 17, I got an offer to move out to the Bay Area to be a UI designer for a tech company in Palo Alto.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
What was the first design job you've ever done? What was it?
Like formally, or just like as a
Either,
freelancer?
whatever comes to mind.
It was a lot of like fake projects that I put up on Dribble. That was like the first ones. I never told any of the companies that were interviewing me that they were fake. They looked really real. So yeah, good framing there, I guess you can start with that.
Are the projects still online on your Dribble profile?
I think so. I never touched my Dribble. Like I just I left everything on there, kind of there. So I think if you scroll back, you'll find like the early day UI stuff, and it's like super skeuomorphic. A lot of like grain textures and strokes and inner shadows and all that extra stuff.
Oh yeah, I remember the skeuomorphic days. That's a good way to start in design for sure. A good moment to start in design. Okay,
Yeah,
so
totally.
you started doing design, making up kind of fake projects to build your portfolio. and then you landed a job. So was that, were you employed by the company,
Yes.
by company Palo? Okay, and how was that like?
It was, I've had imposter syndrome like on an hourly basis, but I also had the naivety of a 17-year-old, like where I felt like I haven't gotten enough no's and I haven't seen enough people around me fail. Like it's just like the purity of a 17-year-old, where anything's possible kind of thing. So I didn't, even though I had imposter syndrome, I was also like convinced that everything was fine. Like what can possibly go wrong? And that wasn't from a means of knowing the possibilities. It was from the means of like really not knowing what can possibly go wrong. Like it didn't occur to me that I can get fired and be left with the liability of the rent of my apartment, which was really expensive in the Bay Area. Like that didn't occur to me. uh, and luckily that didn't happen.
Wow. So
Yeah.
what happened next?
Once I was in the Bay Area, it was just like going from like between different companies. Like, I worked with like Mixbook, I worked with Teespring, I worked with eBay Labs at one point for a bit. But yeah, just as I went along, I just kind of like every year, 2 years, I switched jobs while I was in the Bay Area for about 6 years, and just try to like find like new opportunities that taught me the things I needed to learn, because I realized that I'm not going to have any schooling. So I didn't gravitate towards going to big companies because I felt like they'd call me out, like they'd know I'm like really not good enough or something like that early on. And I went for earlier stage companies because I felt like they'll give me more ownership. And really, I learned that you don't learn more by mentorship when you go to companies because most people are too busy to teach you anything. It's more a means of like being offered enough responsibility, right? And I figured I can get that if I go to a small to medium sized business startup. And initially it was small companies, and then I was like, all right, you know what? I want to go for medium, but one that's older, right? So a lot of startups are only like 2 years old. I went for one that was like a medium-sized startup that was like 8 years old. I figured they'd have way more experience in like maturing their processes and know what the hell they're talking about. And I was right. That was Mixbook, and there I pretty much finally got to work with people who had a methodology. Like they were getting to success with the same method over and over again. So that showed some level of seniority or maturity, and that really taught me a lot, and how to work and how to work with others more than anything. Matter of fact, my product manager at the time, Scott, like he's still a mentor of mine until today. So we're like 6 years running.
Nice,
So
nice.
that's how much I took from that organization.
And so what is design for you? What was it then? What is it for you today?
Design is people, in my opinion. Like you just, a lot of times it's easy to think about design from a place of what's possible, but it's very different than to think like, what do people want? What do people relate to? How do people understand the thing you're designing? So for me, I find that like a lot of my designs failed until I learned a decent amount of psychology. And that's like when everything changed. Before that, I was like designing using like best practices, like things looked good, things animated well, all that good stuff. And like you'd launch it, and then it just didn't convert. It just didn't do the thing. And then you get like someone rings on your doorbell, like a month and a half later from the business team, and be like, oh, we were measuring the performance of the thing you launched last month. You worked on this, right? It's almost like a collector, right? Because you ship it and you're like, all right, I'm done. I'm like done with this. But like eventually it's like a bounty hunter that comes around like from the business team, like, you worked on this, right? I'm like, yeah. It's not doing the thing we wanted it to do. I'm like, oh, I just thought it was supposed to look pretty, like, and then you start really, you start taking a higher level of accountability and figuring, hey, like whatever it is I do design needs to eventually be used. And you need to understand humans to a good enough degree in order to like ever have the intuition on how to do that.
That's fascinating. And yeah, I mean, the more mature product designers certainly understand that as well. And that's such a meaningful insight. Thank you for sharing that. So you did great at different startups, different sizes. You were doing design and maturing your relationship with design, your understanding of people and behaviors. But it doesn't seem like you just kept going that way. What prompted the move to go and be independent?
Well, I went freelance by mistake. When my last job, I was at Compass in New York. I moved out of the Bay Area, moved back to New York. My family was there, and I was getting to a point in my career where I was like, all right, I want to emphasize like having a community, having friends I can see myself being around for like the next 10 years plus kind of thing. And I felt like everything in the Bay Area was around like, your friends eventually start their own company and then they can't see you for 3 years, right? Like there's a lot of that. So I moved back to New York, went to Compass. And when I was there, I spent about a year and a half. And when I finally came around to the thought of like, I don't want to be in New York. And also I wasn't thrilled with my job at Compass. I was eventually starting to get to a point where I didn't feel super challenged, right? And I think that happens a lot for designers. I thought to myself hard, okay, like I made a massive move just like 2 years ago to New York. I can't just do these massive moves every day. What's next, right? And I decided to myself, I don't know. But the biggest thing was I told myself I'm not going to go to another lily pad, right? Which is just like get another company, have all the status, have like the good pay and all this different stuff, and just punt on answering that question for another 2 years. So when I went to Israel, so when I decided to leave Compass, I decided, hey, I'm going to go to Israel because I like the area, I like being there. And if I'm going to have to like figure out this big question in life, I want to do it at least in a place where I enjoy being, right? I didn't know if I was going to live there, stay there. I just packed my bags and moved to Israel, and told myself, you know what, I'm going to work on this specific product. Eventually I wanted to like build a company. About like a month after I got to Israel, I wanted to build a company, not a big company. I just wanted to build a product more than anything that was my own. So I wanted to bootstrap it. I wanted to sell it and keep it small. I wanted a team of 5, and I wanted like enough of MRR that monthly recurring revenue, that it pays for the employees, and that's it. I don't want investors, none of that. Simple, like mom and pop shop meets tech, right? That was my dream. And we had an idea, me and a buddy of mine. We started working on a prototype, and our hypothesis after we tested it failed. But before we got to a point where I realized that I'm not going to make that far unless I have like enough savings to pay for my life while I'm building out this product. And I realized like I'll run out of savings at one point or another. So I had to start subsidizing my income. But when I asked myself how I'm going to subsidize it, I told myself, hey, if I do 50% freelance, 50% like build my own product, I knew I wouldn't give enough of myself to each, and both of them will fail, right? So I told myself one needs to be like the primary thing. And I said, the product's going to be the primary thing. I need to figure out a way to make enough money to pay just for my expenses with freelance, right? So my goal was to say, how do I make $4,000 a month, working 10 to 15 hours a month? That was my goal, right? And when I started with that question, in retrospect, like what happened was, it was almost like asking that Peter Thiel question of like, how do you make something that takes 10 years happen in 6 months? The constraints that I was trying to fight were significantly stricter. And because of that, it pushed me to come up with significantly more creative and more clever answers to the path I ended up taking, right? Whereas like if I said, hey, I have 80 hours a month to extend, or like more than that, and how do I make a full salary on that? That's an easier question to answer because there's plenty of playbooks for that. When you have to answer the question of like, how do you make 4,000 with 10 hours a month? You find yourself like gravitating towards all the things people do, and then realizing, okay, fine, this won't work for me. Right. And then you have to continue searching. So where people start searching and then stop because they're like, this can work for me, I had to like pass over and just say, okay, fine, I'm going to continue searching because this can't work for me. And then what ended up happening was I succeeded that goal. I was like, all right, I figured out a way to make 4,000 with 10 hours of my time a month. And my company, or the product that I had an idea of, like the test failed. Our hypothesis was a bust, and I didn't have any backup ideas. And then it occurred to me, I'm like, okay, so long I don't have a product idea, I can just, do more of this freelancing thing. If I made 4,000 with 10 hours of my time, I'm sure I can multiply that by 4 and have a salary, like I can do that in the meantime until I come up with an idea. So I did that. And then, more than that even. And I was like, all right, I'll just do this for a while. And that's how I got into freelancing.
Nice. And you were freelancing as a designer then?
Yeah, I was freelancing as like a product designer for the most part. I wasn't
nice.
strategic on my positioning. But that was a general vicinity.
So, I love the fact, even the way you tell your story, you have those frameworks and you think in frameworks. And I know you have fantastic frameworks now about how to be an independent professionals in tech, and how to work with customers, how to approach customers, and how to build large scale projects. But at the time, like, what was like a really stupid thing you'd done as a beginner freelancer that you would
So
never make again that mistake today?
oh God, let's start with the biggest one. I worked with friends. I worked without a contract. I punted on payment. Like I said, yeah, you can pay me at the end if you're satisfied. I did a bunch of that stuff. The first 6 months
Okay.
of freelancing, I made negative $17,000. And I say negative,
Wow.
not because my expenses were high, it was because my main client just like shorted me. Like at the end, it was just like, hey, yeah, no, we're not going to pay you the rest of the amount. I'm like, huh,
Oh man.
really?
Yeah, and then what can you do? That was
Yeah,
the
it's
one
like,
without a contract?
no, I don't want to have like a janky like agreement. Um, and yeah, it's just, it
Yeah,
wasn't
it's
good.
rough. It's
It
rough.
was,
So what's the first lesson you learned then?
um, it's uncomfortable to talk about money when you first start freelancing. And it really, the discomfort comes from the side of like that vulnerability of feeling like if you feel like the second you start talking about it, there's a higher chance they might say no. So you try to procrastinate on it. But if you don't get strictly aligned on what the deliverables are and how much you're getting paid for that and what the standard of conduct is on both sides, uh, you're going to lose because the client always wins, right? Like they're always like, if they end up saying X and you say Y, and there are two
Right.
different perspectives of the same problem, you're going to have to give them the upper hand. On one side, like they hold the money. So like they can just decide not to pay you and you just don't have the funds to go after them in court, nor the patience. And two, like you don't want to mess up your reputation and all this different stuff. So it's just like, it's so important to get crystal clear on expectations, like upfront, even if it makes you a little bit uncomfortable, including finances, including roles and responsibilities, including all of that. And then just
Yeah.
never deal with it. Like it's just do it, forget it, move on.
Yeah, it's a really good one. You know, obviously, I mean, we are experiencing in the world today one of the greatest job disruptions of all time. And more, I'm sure you see the same. We see phenomenal people that quit some of the top tech companies, the ones we know all very well. Usually comes with a little tweet. I'm just like, hey, today was my last day at Facebook.
Right.
And they jump into the abyss and they say, you know what? I want to be the CEO of myself. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I want to build myself up. I want to go independent. Maybe I want to build a startup on the side. Maybe not. I'm not sure yet. But either way, I want to work on challenges that I care about. Um, Someone like that who gets started, like what should they be thinking about?
Well, everything's going to be different from that day on, right? I think a lot of people like they know that at some level, but they don't understand how it's going to be different. Not how much, but how it's going to be different. Most people come from the world of like being a contributor, like they're a designer, engineer, a manager. And when they shift into being self-employed, you're technically running a business of one, but it's still a company. It's a company of one. And that means you have to take on like a couple of hats. You have to be a visionary, you have to be a manager and a contributor. And some people have like 20 years experience being a contributor, right? You forget, well, you take for granted all of the resources you have in a company when you worked that made your job like possible, like enabled you to do the thing you want to do without needing to deal with all the other stuff. Like you need to do invoicing, you need to think about like what your goals are, you need to do budgeting, you have to know how to manage expectations and clients and run workshops now, like all this different stuff that your manager used to do, the HR department used to do. Like you don't notice it until you go self-employed. And now you need to learn how to do all this stuff. And I think the biggest misconception is like you can go freelance, and if you're talented enough as a contributor, everything will just work itself out. Like you just get paid bank, you get like all the clients like frolicking to you, and everything just works out. And it's not true. It's
Right.
so not true. And
Yeah.
that's where I think like most people just they don't set their own expectations as to what's about to happen.
Well, it's a good thing we're building a company to help with that, but excellent insight. And frankly, there's so many questions I would ask you about on that topic. I know you have just incredible syllabus at this point of how to help people to fulfill those dreams in a structured and smart way. I think for that, you're going to be talking to the community next week. So I'll leave it as that. Before I let you go, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your workflows. So you're
Okay.
working with a bunch of clients. I can tell, an optimizer just like me that always try to figure out better productivity hacks and ways to structure your life and have a good setup for the things you do. Anything you can share with us as we're all stuck at home in most places on how we can manage our workload and our activities in a smarter way? What works for you?
I'll give you like my favorite insight, which is a lot of times we have access to smaller clients, right? There's a lot of like small businesses that have smaller projects to hand out, and there are big businesses that have sizable projects to hand out. Naturally, like we go after those. And one of my bigger insights is like go after the big ones. And there's a reason for it. One, the bigger ones tend to be more professional. And what that means for your workload is they value results more than they value like you needing to allocate every hour of your time, right? So, and that's because they value opportunity costs more than anything. And now what does that mean as far as your workload? It means that when I take on, say, 3 clients at a time, right? And they're big clients that are mature. They value opportunity costs more than anything. And they're not trying to make sure I work for every hour that they have on contract. They're just really concerned about the results. What ends up happening is I can sell 150% of my time, right? When you work with companies that try to allocate every hour of your time because they don't know how to think in results, they don't know how to think about opportunity cost before anything, you can't sell 150% of your time. You can only sell 100% of your time, and you also get paid less for it. So as far as like time management goes, as far as being able to like double down on the amount this was like the biggest insight I ever got into being able to maximize the returns I make, and why not to work with smaller clients. Something more practical, I would say, like as far as like how to manage your workflow is, definitely make a habit of planning your week. That's the most important thing. Make a list of all the things you need to get done. And then after that, make a list of all of the time blocks, which are different. You might have a goal to say, design a website by the end of the week. But from there, try to break it down into chunks of time that you'll literally go then and block out into your calendar, and then go do it.
A week in advance. Beginning of the week, you've planned out the whole week?
Totally. And wow. There's the obvious question, which is like, why do it by the week and not do it by the day? And I think, I know, at least for my line of work as a designer or anybody that's in a position where they're doing knowledge work, not labor work, something you notice is your brain is like a fickle little piece of shit that sometimes is in the mood to do the work and sometimes is not, right? Sometimes it's creative and sometimes it's not. And, when you plan by the week, you can compensate for that. When you try to block yourself in and say, fine, this needs to all get done in this day, you end up with a problem. And when you look at a task, let's say like design a website, right? I need to design this website this week, hypothetically. I can then say, fine, what are my time blocks? I can say, I need to first sketch it out to understand the content and the concepts that are going into it. Then I'm going to want to give myself at least a day buffer to kind of let it simmer. Right? And then I'll come back on Wednesday, do an initial draft, then give myself another buffer, and then come back Friday and wrap it up. Right? Now, if you can plan like that, you're likely to succeed the task. Then if you go against the way your creative brain works and says, okay, fine, technically, if you look at the 3 time blocks are 2 hours each, so I can just take them and put a 6-hour time block on Monday, and then I'm good. Like, it doesn't work that way, right? So when you can plan by the week, you can actually like adapt your workflow to work the way you creatively flow that energy out. And that also is the same thing for coding. And you want to factor in when you have meetings to make sure that you have a section of your day where meetings are going to happen. They don't happen abruptly in between when you want to get into flow. That's another very big thing. Like I usually take meetings in the back end of my day strategically, because I have clients that are also in the States and also in Israel. So if I say I take meetings in the morning for my clients in Israel, then I would have to work on my stuff for my clients in the States in the afternoon. But those are hours that also my clients in Israel can bug me. So what I do is I get my deep work done in the morning, and I tell everybody, hey, my hours for meetings is between 2 and 6 p.m. Israel time, which ends up being like earlier in the day in New York. And it's also normal hours for people here in Israel. And it also makes sure that there's never like this scattered set of meetings throughout my day. So I try to consolidate. Right. It's also the reason why I don't take clients in Australia. That came up like about a month ago, where I had a lead. I was very serious about taking a client, but that messed it up because I wouldn't be able to put their meetings into when I got meetings. And I knew that would wreck my overall productivity.
I really like this insight. Also, I love how you think about this truly like the company of you, and think about this holistically and sustainably. It's really thoughtful and really interesting. Yeah. So in your career as an independent, do you feel like you're successful, you're able to work on really good projects, you're make a very, very good earnings on that, doing things that you like? What have you reached a plateau, or is there more than you can achieve?
I think there's always room to grow. But I'm happily at a plateau, like meaning like I wanted to get here for a really long time. And I think one of my bigger lessons throughout my career is like stopping the endless ladder. Is like, you know, at a certain point when you unlock something, just enjoy it for a bit. Like my life, like I have like an apartment that I really, really want. I live by the beach where I really, really want. I get enough work in and also enough time to myself with my friends. I get to make Neapolitan style pizza like almost every Friday and just like not need to care about work. Right. Like so
And
yeah,
we
there's
just saw the
always,
beautiful sunset going over your face, the Tel Aviv
oh yeah,
sunset. That's amazing. Yeah.
yeah. So
So you're in a good
there's that
place right
too.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's in a good place. So I think plateaus are not a bad thing. Like I think like they're sometimes staged as like a negative thing. Right now, I would say like I haven't catapulted in a while. Right, I've incrementally grown, which is fine. Um, and I'll probably catapult again maybe in another couple of years when there's like an itch that's necessary enough. And this just goes back to like my belief that, you know, necessity is the mother of all progress, right? Like it's I've always like asked people like, oh, but when am I finally gonna do this right? Like I've spoken to like mentors a couple of times, and like they always tell you a bunch of ways to do it, but like the truth is you'll get to it when you're fed up doing it the other way around, right? Like
Right.
and that's when you're gonna just bulldozer through. And right now I don't have something on the docket that I really want to like bulldozer through, and I'm very, very happy with my plateau. And you know, while I'm at a plateau, I'm kind of like relaxed, and it gives me more affordance to like just do things like this, like share and help others like reach this peak, which to me is a plateau, but like it is a peak. But if I continue to climb, I'm too busy climbing. I can't help people get here, right? So like I enjoy the plateau. There's so much benefits, I think, in being on a
That's
plateau.
beautiful. And it's amazing that you choose to take advantage of this to help others and teach and share what you've learned. You know, particularly, I really, really love this insight you just shared. To me, you know, 2020, I would sum it up as learning to appreciate the things we take for granted. So
Yeah,
you're helping me do that. So thank you for that. Didi, you've got a phenomenal story. And it clearly sounds that it's just the very beginning. So I'm very excited to hopefully look back at this interview in a few years. And hopefully I'll be in Tel Aviv with you, enjoying the sunset as well. And we'll laugh at when you were saying, "Oh yeah, I was at a plateau," and like it, you know, it was for like 5 minutes, but still, everything holds. And we're excited for you to share more of your insights, learnings, and frameworks. Thank you so much for your time. You're an inspiration
absolutely.
to all of us.
My
Keep
pleasure.
doing amazing stuff. And talk again very soon, Didi.
Thank you so much for having me.